Okay, so we are live again here on in February. We're going live every single day of the month for February. We're answering your real estate questions. And today's topic, we are talking about mortgage investment corporations, or what we call MICs. And MICs are essentially, hang on, let me get a couple more people in here. Okay. All right, so essentially what MICs are, mortgage investment corporations. And what mortgage investment corporations do is they are what we call a syndicated group. So they'll pool a large pool of money together from small individuals. So they'll say, like, let's say everybody invests $10,000 and they might raise $10 million from, like 1,000 people or whatever it is. And the problem is what we're going to be answering today, and there's like sort of what sparked this was there's an article in the newspaper, and what I wanted to talk about with MICs is like, who are they for, why are they used, and why are they so risky? Because most of the news articles are just like this one. This one says builder defaults on payments linked to Fortress Real Developments. So if you don't know who Fortress Real Developments or Fortress Real Capital are, they are one of the, if not the largest mortgage investment corporations in the country. They've since defaulted and they're no longer in business because they had to file bankruptcy. They were behind it almost $100 million of payments to people, to just individual investors. So what is a MIC? So a MIC is essentially, like I said, it's a syndication of people. So it's a pooled group of money from smaller individuals who can't invest in large scale commercial real estate, usually development sites, which is really who these were designed for. So why MICs were formed and why MICs were started was there's a lot of builders and developers were going to banks, and banks would say, hey, we'll give you 70% of the project, but that's it. And then builders like, hey, we need more money to complete the project. So MICs were formed to be what we call the bridge financing or the construction financing for a lot of these projects. But as these MICs got bigger and bigger, sort of like in the early 2000s, they said, hey, why are we only a second position or mortgage financing or bridge financing? Why don't we take on the first positions for these builders? And that's sure enough what they did. So they had to raise more and more capital, but they were investing in riskier and riskier building sites. And most development projects are risky outright. That's why the interest rates on these are so high. So what MICs are famous for is they'll give you generally anywhere from a 7 to 12% return investment on your money annualized. Plus, they'll give you a bonus once the project is completed. Now, the problem with that is because it's such a high burn of capital back to investors, a lot of these MICs go out of business and they can't survive the building process. So if the building takes 4 years and they need to repay their investors in 4 years and the building is a delay or something happens or prices don't go up or they don't go sideways or for whatever, people don't close on the homes or the condos, and these MICs can't pay out their investors, and the investors come calling for their money, and guess what? They have to go bankrupt. So that's what's been happening over the last, probably about 5 years, especially with the economy the way it is. Like, they just couldn't survive the payout. The problem with a lot of these builders is Fortress was, again, I don't want to throw them under the bus, but they were notorious for doing really risky investing, which is why they give such a high return. There's about 12% on some of their projects annualized. So the investors were loving it. The problem was they would never recoup their money. So Fortress at one point owed $95 million just on one builder. That builder has defaulted on all their payments of $10.5 million of interest. So they're now in courts trying to recoup that money. But the problem with this is the way it's structured was, according to the article anyways, and this is fairly typical for real estate investing, is there's other investors involved. So what happened was this builder went to a bank, got a traditional financing for the building site. Fortress came in behind him, gave them construction loan, bridge financing. And now that they're owed almost $100 million, the banks are now calling in the loans because they realize these projects aren't getting completed. So what's happening is the banks will be paid out first, any other debtors, and then finally the investors. So one, you got to ask the question, who are they for? It's mainly builders, okay? Why use them? So again, traditionally, banks will finance a smaller portion of the construction site, and they'll sometimes give a construction loan also, but it's usually done on a draw. So let's say that the construction project is $200 million build out on the project. the bank will only give them like $40 million increments when they hit a certain level of either sales or construction or whatever it is they're doing. The problem with that is the builders typically need more than that for the carrying of the project, which is where Fortress and Green Shield and there's all these other companies that came in as mix to replace that carrying cost. But it was just too risky, unfortunately. So why are they risky? Well, it's pretty obvious. There's just not enough money to go around on these building sites, and there's too much unknown on these commercial projects to make it viable for a lot of these builders. And paying out 10, 12, 14% interest at times seems great to the investors who are investing, and the builder's like, great, I don't have to put any money out of my pocket. So everything is kind of win-win if the market's going up, if the market's growing, if sales are happening, if people are closing real estate, but we're not in that market right now. So sure enough, this is kind of like a sign of the times, right? So this is just one of this is about 8 articles I read just this week. So property developer West Bank facing similar lawsuits. The one blower is in receivership. We have here where there's another one, a $1.4 billion real estate fund going bankrupt. They just can't provide to their finance people. So why would you ever get involved with this? One, and two, how can you get out of it? So when it comes to mix, I understand the attraction, right? Because it's very difficult to get a double-digit return cash on cash. Meaning if I put $10,000 in, I'm going to be getting back $800 a month of my investment sometimes, and it's just not sustainable. And at the end of the day, it's great initially when the money's coming in. The big problem is those when you want to be paid out. Is the building going to be profitable? Is the building going to be sold out? Are there going to be delays? Right now, builders right across the board, especially in the city where I live, they are canceling projects because the project is no longer viable because inflation and the cost of goods has gone up, the cost of labor has gone up, the city interaction, all of those levies and development charges, they've gone way through the roof. So these builders actually finding themselves, they had great intentions 2 or 3 years ago when they started these projects, but now that they're ready to start construction, they're no longer viable. So if you are in a project like that, how do you get out of it? Well, unfortunately, there's not an easy way to get out of it. One, you can ask for it, but you got to remember, you're one of thousands, if not tens of thousands of people looking for their money back. You can certainly start a lawsuit against these companies. But unfortunately, again, there'll be thousands of people doing the same thing. The likelihood is you won't see it back. So if you are going to invest in a mortgage investment corporation, which is something I never recommend, I prefer you into a real estate investment trust, which is a very different component of how they invest in real estate. And we'll get to that another day this month. We're going to be talking live every single month and answering any of your questions that you may have. So why you shouldn't invest in mix? Because they're too risky. So I understand it's a great rate of return, but I just wouldn't, the risk is not worth the return from it. If you're going to do something risky, it's better that you own the real estate yourself as opposed to providing to a third party who's going to do it on your behalf. So if you want a double-digit return, start with flipping. That's what I do. You'll buy a property, you'll renovate, and you'll sell it, and the double-digit returns are fairly standard in the business of flipping. It has some inherent risk, but it's not too risky that you can't do it on your own as long as you do your due diligence. So today, again, that's mix in a nutshell. I don't want to keep these lives on too long, but if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to us and we'll go from there. But at the end of the day, just be super careful and super due diligent when you're doing your mortgage investment corporation investments, if at all. And I really don't recommend them. But if you do really want to do it and you want to be into a project like that, just make sure you read the fine print. All right, till tomorrow. We'll talk to you then.